Chapter 1: The Moment That Changed Everything. I never believed in love at first sight. It always sounded like a story people told themselves to feel something magical in an otherwise ordinary world. That was before he walked into my life, or rather, my favorite little cafe on Maple Street. I remember it vividly. It was early October, the kind of crisp autumn day when the air smells like rain and fallen leaves. I had slipped away from the office during lunch, needing a moment to breathe. The cafe was warm and familiar, with golden fairy lights strung along the windows, and the soft clink of porcelain mugs, mixing with low jazz from the corner speaker. I was standing in line, absently scrolling through emails I didn't want to answer, when the door opened behind me. I didn't look up at first, just the usual bell above the entrance, nothing unusual. But then something made me turn. He stepped inside, brushing damp hair off his forehead, his coat lightly dusted with rain. It wasn't his looks, though I'd be lying if I said he wasn't striking. It was something else, a kind of presence, as if the room shifted slightly to accommodate him. His eyes, stormy blue, deep and unreadable, scanned the room casually. And then they met mine. The world paused. I had read about moments like this. I'd seen them in movies, scoffed at them in novels. But now, experiencing it firsthand, I realized I had never really understood. My heart stuttered in my chest. I felt the air leave my lungs, like I'd forgotten how to breathe. It was as if an invisible thread snapped into place between us, stretched taut across the space that separated us. He smiled, not just with his mouth, with his whole face. It was gentle, warm, like sunlight after a storm. I froze. All I managed was an awkward half-smile back before quickly turning to face the counter. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for my wallet. What was happening to me? Can I help the next guest? The barista called, and I shuffled forward. Hi, yes, I said, voice too high. Caramel latte, please. Medium. As I paid, I glanced back. He was still there, still looking. Not in a creepy way, just observant. He offered another smile and gave a tiny nod, like he recognized something in me, like we already knew each other. I took my latte and made my way to the corner table I always chose, near the fogged-up window. I tried to act normal, sipping my drink, pretending to check my phone. But I felt his presence like static in the air. When he finally ordered and sat down, just one table over, I nearly spilled my coffee. He opened a leather-bound notebook, clicked a pen, and started writing. His expression was focused, eyebrows drawn together slightly. I stole glances when I thought he wouldn't notice. There was something almost poetic about the way he held the pen, the way his jaw tensed when he was thinking. Then, unexpectedly, he looked up, and I panicked. I dropped my gaze to my phone, pretending to scroll. My heart was thudding like I'd run a mile. When I looked again, he was smiling softly, not mocking, not amused, just kind. Excuse me, a deep voice said a moment later, and I looked up to find him standing near my table. Sorry if this is weird, but I couldn't help noticing your sketchbook. It took me a second to realize what he meant. I often doodled in the margins of my planner. I'd been absent-mindedly drawing while trying to distract myself. Oh, I said, cheeks flushing. It's nothing, really, just some messy lines. I like it, he said. I'm Julian, by the way. Julian. The name settled into my brain like it had always been there. I'm Claire, I replied, and to my surprise, he smiled wider. Claire, he repeated, as if trying it out. Do you mind if I sit? And just like that, he was across the table from me, holding a cup of black coffee, his notebook still in hand. We talked, and somehow minutes became hours. He told me he was a writer working on his second novel, that he came to this cafe whenever he had writer's block. Apparently, we just missed each other until today. I told him about my job in design, how I hated corporate life but loved colors and stories and lines. We laughed about how pretentious coffee culture had become, and how autumn in the city was the only time it didn't feel suffocating. He asked questions no one ever asked. about the things I dreamed about when I was 10, what book I'd bring to a deserted island if I believed in fate. By the time we both glanced at our phones, nearly 3 hours had passed. "I should go," he said, reluctantly standing. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. But would you maybe want to meet again?" I nodded, heart racing. "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers, and he lingered a moment longer than necessary, as if neither of us really wanted this moment to end. As he walked out into the rain, I watched him go, my heart still fluttering in my chest. Something had shifted. Something real. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew it wasn't ordinary. It was the beginning. Chapter 2. The Name in My Phone. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I lay on my bed, fully clothed, my caramel latte cup still sitting empty on the nightstand. My fingers hovered above my phone screen where his name now lived in my contacts. Julian Roth. Simple. Elegant. A name that somehow already felt familiar. I didn't text him right away. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I was afraid of seeming overeager. Afraid that maybe I had imagined the entire connection we'd shared. That maybe I'd read too much into a few smiles, a long conversation, a passing glance that made my skin tingle. But deep down, I knew. What we had felt in that cafe wasn't imaginary. There had been gravity, like the universe had briefly realigned to place us at the same table. Him, with his thoughtful eyes and warm voice. Me, with my fluttering heart and hands that wouldn't stay still. I turned over in bed, staring at the ceiling. The memory of his voice echoed in my mind. "You seem like someone who notices things most people miss." I had blinked, unsure how to answer. No one had ever said something like that to me. I usually blended in. Background noise, the quiet girl with a sketchbook, good at nodding and listening but rarely seen. But Julian had seen me. Not just the surface version of me. He'd looked into my eyes as if searching for some hidden code, and it terrified me how much I wanted to let him find it. I opened his message. "Hey Claire, today was unexpected and kind of amazing. Let me know when you're free. I'd like to see you again." Julian, I smiled despite myself. My heart beat a little faster. The message was simple, but it carried warmth, sincerity. I typed, erased, and retyped my response at least 6 times before finally hitting send. "Hi, Julian. It was something else, wasn't it? I'm free this weekend if you are." He responded within seconds. "Saturday afternoon? There's a bookstore I love. It has a hidden cafe inside. Thought you might like it." God, a man who reads and brings you to cafes inside bookstores. Was this real? Perfect, I wrote. "Text me the address." Saturday. By the time Saturday arrived, I had spent a ridiculous amount of time picking out my outfit. Something effortless, artsy, but not trying too hard. I settled on a navy knit sweater, high-waisted jeans, and ankle boots. I left my hair down. Natural, a little wild. The bookstore was tucked between 2 brownstones near the river, a place I would have walked past 100 times and never noticed. When I arrived, he was already waiting out front, leaning against the brick wall with a paperback in his hand. He looked up and smiled the moment he saw me. "Claire," he said, and I loved the way he said my name, like it was something soft and valuable. "You're early," I teased. "So are you." We stood there for a moment, just smiling, before he opened the door and held it for me. A little brass bell jingled above us. Inside, the store smelled like old pages and cedarwood. It was warm and quiet, the kind of place where whispers felt appropriate. Shelves curved like mazes, and in the very back, through an unmarked archway, was the cafe he had mentioned. A hidden gem with mismatched chairs and plants in every corner. "I love this place," I said, settling into a window seat. "I come here when I don't want to be found," Julian replied, sliding into the seat across from me. "Sometimes it's easier to write when the world disappears a little." "Do you always write in public?" I asked. "Not always," he said, "but sometimes I like people around me. The noise helps me focus." He paused. "What about you? Do you sketch every day?" I hesitated, not as often as I should. I let work take over most of the time, but when I draw, it feels like breathing, like remembering who I actually am. He watched me with that same quiet intensity. It wasn't unsettling, just full, focused. I think that's what all art is, he said, a way to remember. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee, both of us watching the rain tap softly against the window. Then he asked, "Do you believe in coincidences?" I looked up. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, eyes searching. "Do you think we were meant to meet that day, or was it just chance?" I swallowed. His question hit me harder than I expected. "I don't know," I said truthfully. I used to believe everything was random. But now, after that day, Julian smiled. "Yeah, same." I felt a rush of warmth in my chest, like my heart had stretched its arms, yawned, and finally woken up. We spent the next hour lost in conversation, about books, about childhood, about how neither of us liked winter but loved the idea of snow. He told me his first novel had been a disaster. Too much poetry, not enough plot, he laughed. But that he was proud of it anyway. I told him I'd once wanted to be an illustrator for children's books. He asked me why I didn't. I got scared, I admitted. It felt too big, too uncertain. He nodded slowly, as if he understood. "I think all good things start with fear," he said. Before we left, he handed me a copy of one of his favorite books, The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. He wrote something on the inside cover before handing it to me. "For your collection," he said, voice soft. When I got home, I opened it. "Claire, for someone who notices things, I hope this book finds the shadows you've forgotten. Julian." I pressed the book to my chest and closed my eyes. Something inside me had shifted again. This wasn't just the beginning of a romance. It was the beginning of belonging. Chapter 3. Shared Silences. Julian and I met again the next weekend. This time, we didn't plan anything special. Just a walk by the river and a stop at a quiet park bench with a thermos of hot tea between us. I liked that we didn't need constant entertainment. His presence felt enough, like a warm scarf wrapped gently around my shoulders. We watched the leaves fall in slow spirals from the trees. The city for once seemed hushed, as if it too had stopped to let something soft begin. He was sitting slightly turned toward me, one elbow resting on the back of the bench. His coat collar was popped up against the breeze, and his eyes, half lit by the late sun, had that faraway look again, as if he were already writing something in his mind. "What are you thinking?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, about how fragile it all is. I glanced at him. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair. "This, life, moments like this. They feel like bubbles, beautiful and round and floating, but they pop so easily." There was something raw in his voice, something aching behind the poetry. I had heard people speak like that in movies, sure. But this was different. This wasn't performance. It was pain wearing the mask of metaphor. "You talk like someone who's lost something," I said quietly. He looked down at his hands. "Maybe I have." The air between us grew still, and I could feel the weight of his silence. Not heavy in a bad way, just full of meaning, of stories not yet told. He didn't offer more, and I didn't press. Instead, I poured us more tea from the thermos, careful not to spill. Sometimes connection grows not from shared words, but from shared silences. As we walked back toward the city, our hands brushed once, twice, until finally his fingers closed gently around mine. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. But my heart soared in my chest like a bird breaking through cloud. When we reached the subway station, I expected him to release my hand. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "Claire," he said, voice low. "I don't really know what this is yet, but I don't want it to stop." "Me neither," I said. His smile was faint but real. Then he stepped forward and kissed me, soft, slow, and just a little unsure, as if asking permission with every breath. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't the dramatic kind of kiss you see in films with string quartets in the background. It was real. And real, I was beginning to learn, was so much better than perfect. Later that night, I stood in my apartment staring at the city lights through the window. My fingertips still tingled where they had touched his. My lips still burned, not from the kiss itself, but from the quiet promise it had carried. I could feel something inside me shifting, softening. But with that softness came fear, because it's one thing to fall, and another entirely to land. And I wasn't sure yet if Julian was falling too, or if he was still standing on the edge. A week later, we started seeing each other more, sometimes over dinner, sometimes just brief walks or coffee runs. Nothing flashy, but each encounter felt like another stitch in a fabric that was slowly, beautifully forming around us. One night we ended up back at my place. It wasn't planned. He had walked me home and I'd impulsively invited him in. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing over childhood memories. Mine of failed treehouse attempts, and his of stolen library books he'd always meant to return. I think I was 10 when I decided I wanted to be a writer, he said, twirling the stem of his glass between his fingers. What happened at 10? I asked. His gaze drifted toward the ceiling. My mom gave me a journal, said I needed somewhere to put all the things I didn't say. Wise woman, I said. She was, he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. Before she got sick. I sat up straighter. Oh, he waved a hand. It's okay. She passed a few years ago. But she's the reason I write. Still feels like she's reading over my shoulder sometimes. There was a beat of silence. Do you miss her? I asked. His answer was so quiet I almost missed it. Every day, I wanted to reach for his hand, to do something, anything, that could carry the weight of that loss. But I stayed still, letting him hold the moment in his own way. Thanks for telling me, I said instead. He looked at me, his eyes glassy but clear. Thank you for listening. Then he leaned in, and this time the kiss wasn't tentative. It was deeper, warmer, like an answer. We didn't sleep together that night. We fell asleep tangled on the couch, limbs draped over each other, my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. It was the safest I had felt in a long, long time. The morning after, I woke first. It was still dark outside, and the city was hushed. Julian was still asleep, his arm around my waist, his breath soft against my neck. I lay still, memorizing the moment. But then I noticed something, a notebook peeking from his coat pocket, the one he always carried. Curiosity stirred in me. I knew I shouldn't look. I wasn't that kind of person. But something pulled me. I reached for it carefully, easing it from his coat while he slept. I just wanted a peek, just a page or two, maybe something sweet, maybe something about us. What I found instead made my stomach tighten. On the page I opened to, written in black ink, was my name. Claire, repeated over and over, in bold, looping letters, covering nearly the entire page. And beneath it, one line, if I tell her the truth, will she leave? My throat went dry. I stared at the words for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. Truth? What truth? Before I could turn the page, Julian stirred beside me. I quickly slipped the notebook back where it had been and shut my eyes, pretending to sleep. But I couldn't, not after that. Because now I knew Julian was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had something to do with me. Chapter 4. The Weight of Unspoken Words. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay there in Julian's arms, wrapped in the warmth of something that felt like love. And yet, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The image of that page haunted me. My name, repeated, inked again and again like a spell or a curse. And that single loaded line, if I tell her the truth, will she leave? Tell her what? The sentence played on loop in my mind, tainting the softness of his touch, the peace of his breath against my shoulder. He looked so calm in sleep, his brow smooth, his mouth slightly parted. a boyish version of himself that made my chest ache. I wanted to believe in him, in us, in the quiet perfection of the nights we'd shared and the slow, deliberate way he had made space for me in his world. But that one sentence cracked something inside me. Not completely, not yet. Just enough for doubt to slip through. The morning that followed. When Julian woke, I pretended nothing had changed. We made breakfast together in my tiny kitchen, him flipping pancakes with dramatic flair while I brewed coffee strong enough to shock the dead. We talked about trivial things, laughed, teased, like we were a couple already. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving, his hand lingering on my cheek just a second longer than it needed to. And yet beneath every smile, my thoughts twisted. What aren't you telling me, Julian? I felt guilty for looking in his notebook, for doubting him, but also something deeper, a kind of protective fear that began to grow roots in my gut. Days passed. We kept seeing each other. Dinners, walks, movie nights, early morning texts and late night voice notes. And yet, I couldn't unsee that page. I couldn't unknow what I knew. Sometimes I'd catch him zoning out, staring at his phone a little too long, fingers twitching against the table like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Other times he'd get quiet for no reason, as if he was suddenly lost somewhere far away from me. I wanted to ask, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because how do you confront someone about something they don't know you've seen? So I buried it under laughter and kisses and shared playlists and the warmth of being held at night. But like all things buried alive, it didn't die, it grew. One night, it was nearly midnight when I found myself sitting alone at my sketch desk, pencil in hand, paper blank. Julian had canceled our plans that evening, last minute. Something came up, he texted. No explanation, no follow-up. Something tight and anxious coiled in my chest. I wasn't the jealous type. I never had been. But this wasn't jealousy. It was uncertainty. A growing gap between the person I saw and the questions I couldn't stop asking. I reached for my phone, opened our chat, stared at it for a while. Then, without overthinking it, I typed, "What's something you've never told anyone?" I hit send. Seconds passed, then minutes. I almost regretted it. Then the typing bubbles appeared. There's a version of me no one sees. I'm still trying to figure out if it deserves to be loved. I stared at the screen, heart sinking. It was beautiful, honest, sad. And yet, it wasn't an answer. A visit. 3 days later, I surprised him. I told myself it wasn't to snoop, that I just missed him, that I wanted to see the inside of the apartment he always described but never invited me to. He hesitated for a moment when I asked, then smiled and said yes. He lived in a loft, 3rd floor of an old brick building near the edge of the arts district, the kind of place that looked like it belonged to someone who wrote poetry by candlelight and knew the names of every star. When he opened the door, I saw traces of him everywhere, half-read books stacked in crooked piles, vinyl records leaning against the wall, a typewriter on the windowsill like something from another century. But more than that, I saw the loneliness. There were no photos, no evidence of a life shared, just him and the ghost of whatever he was keeping locked away. He made us tea and we sat on the floor again, surrounded by the quiet of his world. And then I said it, softly, carefully. "Julian, can I ask you something?" He looked up. Of course, my heart pounded. "What are you afraid I'll leave you for?" His face stilled. Every muscle in his body seemed to lock. What do you mean? I didn't blink. "You once wrote it, in your notebook, that if you told me the truth, I might leave." Silence. Heavy, wide, awful. He didn't ask how I knew. Didn't accuse. He just looked down at his hands. Then, in a voice I'd never heard before, thinner, rougher, he whispered, "I didn't think you saw that." "I did," I said gently, "and I haven't stopped thinking about it since." He nodded slowly. Then he stood, walked to the window, leaned against the frame like it was the only thing holding him up. "I've lied before," he said, "to people I loved, not to hurt them, but because I didn't think they'd stay if they knew who I really was. My stomach twisted. Julian? I used to be someone else, Claire, he said. Not just in the poetic way. Literally. My name, my past, my everything. I left it behind. Why? I asked, breath catching. He turned to face me, and in that moment, something in his eyes shattered, because I had to. Chapter 5. A past with no name. Julian didn't speak right away. He stood by the window, arms crossed as if trying to hold himself together. His silhouette was framed by the late afternoon light, shadows pooling across the floor of his loft. I sat still on the edge of the couch, afraid to move, afraid that anything I said would cause him to disappear, like a breath against glass. Finally, he spoke. I used to be someone else. The words hung in the air like fog. He didn't look at me. My real name isn't Julian Roth. I blinked. What? He turned to me slowly. There was no trace of a smile. His voice was calm, but under the surface, panic. Controlled panic. My legal name is now Julian Roth, yes. But it wasn't the name I was born with. I changed it 3 years ago. I opened my mouth to ask why. But he kept going, like a dam had finally cracked open, and he didn't trust himself to stop. I was 26 when I left. I moved to this city with 2 suitcases and a past I was trying to bury. I changed my name, my number, deleted everything that connected me to the life I had before. Why? I asked again, this time softer. He looked at me. His eyes were red at the edges, but dry. Because I had no choice. I waited. I was engaged, he said. Her name was Amelia. We met in college, dated for 5 years. She was warm, brilliant, always 2 steps ahead of me. I loved her, or thought I did. My heart sank, but I didn't interrupt. We were supposed to get married in June. She left me in April, without a word. No goodbye, no note, just disappeared. Everyone assumed I'd done something, and maybe I had. Maybe I loved her the wrong way. I drowned in it, in the shame, in the loneliness, in the questions no one ever answered. He sat down slowly, folding his hands together. I didn't leave to escape her, he added. I left to escape me. The version of me that had no identity outside of her, outside of what we were. I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. So I burned it all down. He looked at me then, really looked. And then I met you. The silence that followed was full of breath, but empty of words. I tried to process everything. The lie wasn't about cheating or betrayal or scandal. It was about pain, about someone who had clawed his way out of heartbreak by shedding his skin. I understood more than I wanted to. I'm sorry, I said at last, for what happened, for how alone that must have felt. He nodded. It still does some days. Do you miss her? I asked. He hesitated. I miss the person I was when I thought someone loved me. That broke something in me, a string, maybe something delicate and invisible. Without thinking, I reached for his hand. He flinched just slightly, then let me hold it. I'm not her, I said softly, and I'm not going to disappear. He looked away. But I need you to promise me one thing, I added. Anything. No more hiding. Even the ugly things, especially those. Julian exhaled slowly, like a weight had shifted inside his lungs. I promise. Later that night, he fell asleep on the couch again, and I sat in the kitchen, legs curled under me, staring at the same notebook I had once been afraid to touch. This time, he had left it on the table, open, as if inviting me in. I didn't read it. I didn't need to anymore, because I had something better, the living version of the truth, the one who trusted me enough to say what he didn't want to. And yet, beneath my chest, a question still pulsed like a heartbeat. If he could reinvent himself so completely, what else could he bury? The next few days, things didn't go back to normal, but they didn't fall apart either. Julian was quieter, not withdrawn exactly, but reflective. We didn't talk about Amelia again, and I didn't push. Instead, we tiptoed into something new. a version of us with less fantasy and more honesty. We cooked together. We read silently in the same room. We watched films without saying a word, but knowing exactly what the other was thinking. And slowly, I started to see the cracks in his armor. The way he flinched when I raised my voice, even jokingly. The way he over-apologized for the smallest things. The way he stared out windows for too long, like waiting for someone who never came. I wondered if I was falling for a man still haunted by a ghost. But more than that, I wondered if I could love him enough that he might stop haunting himself. A turning point, it happened unexpectedly. We were walking downtown on a rainy Thursday, sharing a single umbrella. I had just told him about my father, how he left when I was 9, and how I still sometimes waited for a letter that never came. He stopped walking. "What?" I asked. He looked at me with such rawness I almost turned away. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost terrified. And maybe that's why I believed it. My breath caught. I hadn't expected it, not yet. I felt warmth rush to my throat, tears prickling my eyes. "I think I'm falling too," I whispered. He stepped forward, resting his forehead against mine, umbrella forgotten. And for a moment, the rain didn't matter. Nothing else did. Chapter 6. The Ghost in the Photograph. Love is not always a crescendo. Sometimes it's the soft hum beneath a quiet life. Steady, necessary, unnoticed until it falters. For a while, things between Julian and me felt almost normal. A new rhythm formed between us. Not perfect, but real. We spent more nights together, shared groceries, swapped playlists. He began calling me home in texts, like, "Be home soon. Dinner on me when I'm home. Miss you. Can't wait to be home." And yet, there was always a faint buzz in the back of my mind. A tension I couldn't name, but couldn't quite silence either. I wanted to believe the worst was behind us. That now that Julian had opened up, we could move forward without shadows. But life doesn't erase its scars just because you name them. Sometimes it just gives them new shapes. One afternoon, I was working from his loft, something we'd started doing on days I couldn't bear the loneliness of my apartment. The rain tapped the window, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby. He was out meeting with his editor. I had just finished a call, stretching, when I knocked over one of the books stacked near the sofa. Paper spilled. I knelt down to gather them, smiling at the mess, until I saw it. A photo, tucked between the pages of a notebook, slightly creased, faded around the edges. Julian and a woman. She was beautiful in a quiet, devastating way. Dark hair, kind eyes, freckles dusted across her cheeks. They stood under a tree, arms wrapped around each other, forehead to forehead, both laughing, glowing. I didn't need to ask who she was. Amelia. I held the photo for a long moment. My fingers shook. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to feel threatened. I had no right. He had told me about her, had buried that life, had chosen me. But something inside me recoiled, a pang of something sharp and hot. Not jealousy, not exactly. Grief for the part of him I could never reach. I slipped the photo back between the pages where it had been. I didn't take a picture, didn't ask, but the image burned behind my eyes like a brand. That night, Julian returned with takeout and rain in his hair. He kissed my cheek, set up bowls on the coffee table, and talked about the new direction for his book. I listened, I nodded, I smiled when he did. But my thoughts spun, not because he had kept the photo, that was human, understandable, but because I realized with a sinking, cold awareness that part of him was still living there, in that other life, with her. And I didn't know how to compete with a ghost. Later, we curled up together on the couch, the scent of jasmine tea filling the room. I leaned against him, my head on his shoulder, fingers tracing the edge of his sweater. He was warm, solid, present, and yet I felt more alone than I had in weeks. "Julian," I said quietly, "Yeah? Do you think it's possible to love someone new while still loving someone you've lost?" His breath caught. He didn't answer immediately. "I think," he said eventually, "it depends on whether you're loving who they were or who you thought they'd be." I nodded, staring into my cup. He turned toward me. "Claire, why are you asking that?" I hesitated. "Because I found the photo there. It was out." He froze. His arm around me dropped away slightly. "I didn't mean to hide it. I forgot it was there." I nodded. "I believe you, but it bothered you." I looked at him. "Would it have bothered you?" He didn't answer. "Not at first. Then, yes." There was a long silence. He reached for my hand. "She's gone, Claire, not just physically, from my life, from who I am now." "Then why keep it?" He swallowed. "Because it reminds me who I used to be and how far I've come." I looked at him, searching. "And who are you now?" He met my gaze. "That's what I'm trying to become." That night, when we made love, it felt different, slower, heavier, like we were both trying to anchor ourselves in something real, something that wouldn't vanish at sunrise. His hands were gentle but urgent. His mouth moved like a question he didn't know how to ask. Afterward, I lay awake next to him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath. And I realized something that scared me. I didn't know how much of Julian belonged to me, and how much still belonged to the memory of someone else. A week later, things shifted, not in big dramatic ways, just subtly, like a boat drifting off course without realizing it. He became quieter again, absent-minded. He forgot small things, what day we had made plans, which movie we talked about seeing. He still held me close at night, still said the right words. But I could feel him slipping into himself, and it wasn't until that Thursday, in the middle of the bookstore cafe, that I finally said it. "I feel like I'm competing with someone I'll never meet." He looked up from his notebook, startled. "Claire, I'm not asking you to erase her. I'm asking you to make room for me." There was something in his eyes, shame, maybe, or fear, or both. "I don't know how," he said. "Then tell me that," I replied. "Don't keep pretending you're fine." He closed the notebook slowly. "I thought I could do this, start over, be better. But sometimes I wake up and I feel like I'm still there, still her fiancé, still the man she left." "You're not," I said. "You're with me now. I'm not her. I don't need you to be perfect, but I want to be," he whispered. "For you." I reached across the table, took his hand in mine. "You don't have to be perfect, just present." His fingers tightened around mine. Then, for the first time, I saw tears slip silently down his cheeks. Not for her, but for the parts of himself he had locked away for too long. And for the first time, I felt him let them go. Chapter 7, Her Name on His Lips. It happened on a Sunday. The kind of lazy, soft-lit day that should have been filled with nothing but warmth. I had spent the morning at Julian's loft, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts, barefoot, sketching with my knees tucked up beneath me while he read on the floor. The kind of ordinary that had started to feel sacred. We were planning to go out for lunch, just a local bistro down the block, nothing special. But we never made it, because someone knocked. 3 soft raps at the door. Hesitant, not urgent, but something in the sound made me pause mid-stroke. Julian looked up from his book, brows furrowed. "You expecting someone?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." He got up slowly, cautious in a way I didn't understand, like someone listening for the sound of a forgotten name. When he opened the door, I couldn't see who stood on the other side, but I could see the way he froze, the way his breath left him all at once. Then, a name, spoken like a prayer. Or a curse. "Amelia?" I stood up so fast the sketch pad fell from my lap. Her. The woman in the photograph. She stepped into view slowly. Same freckled face, same quiet intensity in her eyes. Her hair was pulled back shorter now, and she wore a green raincoat with specks of water still clinging to it. She looked at him like she was seeing a ghost. For a moment, no one moved. Then Julian exhaled, staggered like he'd just been hit. What? How are you? He started, but the words disintegrated in his throat. Amelia looked past him, and her eyes met mine. Oh, she said softly, you're with someone. Her voice was calm, beautiful, painfully familiar. As if I'd heard it in dreams I didn't know I'd had, Julian stepped back instinctively, as if trying to shield both of us at once. Claire, he said hoarsely, I know who she is, I cut in. Of course I did. And somehow she knew who I was, too. She looked at me, not unkindly, but with a quiet ache that felt heavier than jealousy. It wasn't possessiveness in her face. It was something else, something far worse. Regret. I didn't come to cause trouble, Amelia said after a pause. I needed to see him, one last time. Julian looked as if his mind was barely keeping up. Why now? After all this time, I didn't know where you went, she said. You vanished, Jules. You changed everything. And then, one day I found your book, the new one. Your photo was in the back flap. A different name, but the same eyes. He closed his eyes like the truth physically hurt. I didn't think I deserved to find you, she whispered. But I couldn't stay away anymore, not without saying what I never said. Julian didn't respond. Neither did I. The room was too full of the past to make space for language. Eventually, I stepped away. I needed air, or time, or distance, anything that might help me breathe again. I'm going for a walk, I said, voice level but trembling beneath the surface. Claire, Julian called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't, because something inside me had cracked, not from jealousy, not even betrayal, but from the terrifying realization that I might only be a chapter, and she was still the beginning. Outside. The air was cool and sharp. I walked blindly down the street, my hands shoved into my coat pockets, my heart hammering out some rhythm I couldn't translate. I didn't know what I felt. Not fully. Shock, hurt, insecurity. Yes, but also understanding. Because hadn't I seen it all along? The way his voice got distant sometimes. The way he hesitated when I asked about his past. The picture, the notebook, the guarded way he held my love, like it was something fragile he might not deserve. And now, she was here, a living, breathing fragment of the life he left behind. And still loved? I didn't know, and I hated not knowing. An hour later, I came back, because it was still his home, and now, in so many ways, mine too. When I opened the door, the room was quiet. Amelia was gone. Julian was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, head in his hands. He looked up when he heard me, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. She's gone, he said. I nodded, standing near the door. I figured. We stared at each other for a long time, and when neither of us could bear the silence, I asked what had been clawing at me since the moment I saw her. Do you still love her? He didn't answer right away, and that, more than anything, shattered me. Julian, he stood up slowly, crossed the room like a man walking into fire. I don't know what I feel, he said, seeing her again. It lit a fuse in some part of me I thought I'd put out. But Claire, he stepped closer. That doesn't mean I want her back. Then what does it mean? It means I'm still human, he said, almost helplessly. I spent years mourning someone who never gave me closure, and then she shows up, with all those answers I begged for. I didn't know how to hold it. I crossed my arms. And us? What are we? You're what's real now, he said instantly. You're what I choose. Then prove it, I said, voice shaking. Because I can't be the woman who's always wondering if you're looking behind you while holding my hand. He moved closer, slowly. Claire, I love you. The words landed differently this time, not soft, not clean. They landed with pain and promise and fear, but they landed. I looked up at him, every piece of me trembling. I love you too, I whispered. But I won't compete with your past, Julian. I don't want you to, he said. I want to bury it, for good, if you'll stay. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because love isn't enough when one person is still bleeding from old wounds. But maybe, just maybe, we could begin again. Not from scratch, but from truth. So I reached for him. And this time when he held me, I felt something new in the way his arms wrapped around my body. A letting go. Chapter 8, Aftershocks. The day after Amelia left, the air between us changed. Not colder, not distant, just heavier. Like something sacred had cracked, and we were now walking barefoot across the pieces. Carefully, silently. We didn't fight, we didn't blame, but we also didn't pretend. That morning, I made tea. He made toast. We moved through the kitchen like two people trying not to touch too much. Not because the love was gone, but because it was fragile, like new glass still setting in the heat. I watched him across the table, his hands curled around a mug, his eyes rimmed in quiet grief. "You okay?" I asked gently. He looked up, startled, as if no one had asked him that in years. "I don't know," he admitted. Neither did I. Later that day. We sat in the living room, facing each other but not too close. No background music, no distractions, just words, just the echo of truth lingering in the room. "I meant what I said," Julian began. "I love you." "I know," I replied softly, "but love isn't all we need right now." He nodded. "I'm still trying to understand what seeing her did to me. I thought I was past it." "You probably were," I said. "But grief doesn't follow rules. Neither does memory." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I hate that I froze, that I couldn't answer you right away." "You were honest," I said, "and that matters more than saying what I wanted to hear." He looked at me then, eyes heavy but clear. "Do you still want this? Us?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "but I need us to build something new. Not on top of your past, but beside it. Away from it." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What does that look like?" "It looks like full honesty," I said, "even when it's uncomfortable. It looks like showing up, even when we're scared. It looks like you letting me into the parts of you that still hurt, not shutting me out to protect me from them." He nodded, slowly, like every word was a nail sealing something shut behind him. "I want that," he whispered, "with you, the next week." We didn't rush things. We didn't fall back into bed and pretend it was all okay. We took space when we needed to, talked more, slower, deeper. Julian started sharing small things he hadn't before. His favorite poem he never let anyone read, a story behind the scar on his wrist. His fear of thunderstorms and how he used to sleep in the hallway as a kid when the sky cracked open. And in return, I shared mine, the letter my father sent me when I turned 18. The only one. The way I still flinch when someone raises their voice, even if they're not angry. How sometimes I wonder if people only love the version of me that smiles. He listened, really listened, not to fix, not to advise, but to hold. And in that space, something began to bloom again, quieter, slower than before, but maybe stronger, a turning point. One night we stood on his balcony, the city glittering below us like 1,000 tiny promises. The wind was soft, and he held me from behind, his arms wrapped around my waist. "I've started writing something new," he said. I smiled. "Yeah?" "A story about two people who meet when they're both too broken to know what love really is. But somehow, they still find a way to build something beautiful." I turned toward him. "Sounds familiar." He kissed my forehead. "It's not a love story, though. Not really." "No?" "It's a story about staying," he said. "About what it costs and why it's worth it." I rested my head against his chest, and in that moment I knew we weren't just surviving the aftershock. We were rebuilding,